If you've ever been made to feel small, if you've ever been looked down on, then you know what it's like to live your life as a ghost. For me, that wasn't a metaphor, it was my job description. My name is Max, and I'm a night janitor. Or at least, I was. The scent of industrial-grade cleaner and stale coffee became my cologne, the squeak of my cart's wheels the soundtrack to my life. I wore a gray uniform that made me blend into the polished concrete walls of the BioGenix corporate headquarters, a ghost haunting the halls of other people's success. And no one looked down on me more than my own wife, Sarah. To her, my uniform wasn't just a set of clothes, it was a costume representing every single one of my failures. It was the physical manifestation of her disappointment. BioGenix was on top of the world. They'd just gotten FDA approval for a drug called valerium, a so-called miracle cure for a rare autoimmune disorder that had, until now, been a death sentence. The stock had gone supernova. The CEO, a man named Alistair Finch, was being hailed as a visionary, a savior. His perfectly tailored suits and charismatic smile were plastered on every news channel and magazine cover. He was a titan of industry. I, on the other hand, was the man who emptied his trash. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every night I'd push my cart into the pristine glass-walled R&D labs, the very birthplace of this miracle, and I'd clean up the debris of genius. Discarded petri dishes, used latex gloves, crumpled up calculations that were probably worth more than my entire life's savings. Last night was different. Last night I found something. It was in the secure disposal bin in Lab 7, the main lab for the Valerium project. The industrial shredder attached to the bin was jammed, its red error light blinking pathetically. A piece of metal, probably a stray binder clip, had locked up the gears. My job was just to report it, to call maintenance and let them handle it. But something made me pause. Sticking out of the pile of papers and old lab binders was the corner of a small, sleek hard drive. It was a solid-state drive, the kind they use for high-speed data transfer. It should have been pulverized into dust. Protocol was absolute on that. But there it was, whole and intact. A flicker of something, maybe defiance, maybe just a janitor's curiosity about the secrets of the gods made me act. I looked around. The cameras in this section were focused on the lab benches, not the disposal units. With a quick, smooth motion that felt both alien and natural, I slipped the drive into the pocket of my coveralls. It felt cold against my leg. All I was thinking was that I'd wipe it and use it for my own files. A small, illicit perk of the job. When I got home, the house was dark and silent. Sarah was already asleep. She'd long ago stopped waiting up for me. The air in our small house felt heavy with unspoken things, with the ghosts of arguments we never had, and the crushing weight of dreams that had died. I went to the small desk in the corner of our living room, where my old computer rig sat. It was a Frankenstein's monster of salvaged parts and discounted components, a relic from a life I was supposed to have, a life where I ran my own IT support business, a life before I failed. I plugged the drive in. For a moment, nothing happened. Then an icon popped up on the screen. BGX_archive. I clicked it. It wasn't just a few files. It was everything. The complete, unaltered data from the Valerium clinical trials. It was all there, in pristine, unredacted spreadsheets and documents. There were folders labeled Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, and then there was one more. A folder I have a feeling no one outside of Finch's inner circle was ever meant to see. It was labeled simply Icarus_I internal. My blood went cold before I even opened it. Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun. Inside were the real numbers, the buried evidence, the names and subject IDs of patients who hadn't just experienced minor complications. They'd experienced fatal side effects. Sudden catastrophic cardiac arrest, liver failure. The data was clear, the correlation undeniable. They knew, they had known for at least 6 months. They had taken that data, cherry-picked the successes, and buried the bodies deep in a password-protected folder on a drive that was supposed to be turned into glitter. My hands are shaking as I sit here now. The the glow of the monitor painting my face in the dark. The sun is starting to rise. In a few hours, Sarah will wake up and look at me with that same familiar pity. In a few hours, Alistair Finch will step up to a podium for a live press conference, ready to take his victory lap, ready to lie to the entire world. And I'm sitting here, in my living room, that smells faintly of bleach and disappointment, with the truth in my hands. The question isn't what the hard drive contains. The question is what I'm going to do with it. Do I walk into that press conference tomorrow as Max the janitor, the failure, the ghost? Or do I walk in as the man who's about to become Alistair Finch's worst nightmare? The weight of it all hit me in waves. I sat there in the pre-dawn gloom, the damning data glowing on my screen, and I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't just corporate malfeasance, this was a body count. Real people with families and lives reduced to a spreadsheet row highlighted in red, their deaths deliberately and methodically erased from the official record. I felt a profound, bottomless sense of dread. What was I supposed to do? I'm a janitor. My most significant professional decision on any given day is choosing between a 10-gallon or a 30-gallon trash liner. Who would ever believe me? They would paint me as a disgruntled employee, a low-skilled thief with a grudge. They would hire a fleet of lawyers in $1,000 shoes who would eviscerate me on a stand, who would make my entire life look like a pathetic, grasping attempt for attention. They would say I faked the data. And the worst part is, people would believe them. They always believe the man in the suit over the man in the overalls. I leaned back in my creaking chair and closed my eyes, the exhaustion washing over me. Sarah's scent, a faint mix of lavender soap and the expensive lotion her mother always buys her, lingered in the air. I looked towards our bedroom door. She was in there, sleeping soundly, blissfully unaware that our already precarious world was tilting on its axis. In a strange way, this secret felt like the ultimate confirmation of everything she already believed about me. I wasn't a builder, a provider of stability. I was a bringer of chaos, a man who even by accident stumbled into messes far too big for him to clean up. If I told her, I could already hear her voice, laced with panic and exasperation. Max, what have you done? You can't fight these people. You'll lose everything. We'll lose everything. She wouldn't see the moral imperative. She would only see the risk, the disruption, the final, spectacular failure that would surely follow. And in that moment, I felt so utterly, completely alone. My mind drifted back, pulled into the vortex of memory, searching for the breadcrumbs that led me to this moment. I remembered a dinner at her parents' house a few years ago. It was for her father's birthday. Her dad, Richard, was a retired logistics executive, a man who measured everyone's worth by their job title and the car they drove. He spent the entire evening regaling the table with stories of his corporate conquests, his voice booming with self-satisfaction. At some point, he turned his attention to me, a glint of what looked like pity in his eyes. He clapped me on the shoulder, his hand heavy. "So Max," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, still holding down the fort over at BioGenix, keeping those floors shiny. The table went quiet. He said it like it was a compliment, but we all knew what it was. It was a verbal pat on the head for the family pet. I felt my face flush. I looked at Sarah, pleading with my eyes for her to say something, anything, to defend me, to say, "Dad, he works hard," or "That's not a nice thing to say." But she just picked at her overcooked chicken, her eyes fixed on her plate, her silence a screaming indictment. Then, to make it worse, her brother Chad, the golden child, cleared his throat. Chad was a regional sales manager for a company that sold paper. He puffed out his chest and announced he'd won the Salesman of the Month award. For the third time that year, my mother-in-law clapped her hands together in delight, and Richard beamed, proposing a toast to his successful son. They celebrated his cheap plaque as if he'd cured a disease, while I was just the guy who cleaned the floors in the building where they actually did. I just sat there, invisible, nursing a glass of water and feeling my spine dissolve. It wasn't always supposed to be like this. Before I became a ghost, I had a spark. I had a small IT company, just me and a partner, building custom rigs and providing network support for small businesses. I loved it. I loved the problem solving, the challenge of it. I was good at it. But my partner was better at cooking the books than he was at coding. He ran the company into the ground with gambling debts, leaving me with a mountain of angry creditors and a shattered reputation. I lost everything. The shame was a physical thing, a heavy coat I couldn't take off. The janitor job at BioGenix was an act of desperation. It was stable, it had benefits. It was a responsible choice, I told myself. I was doing what a man was supposed to do, providing for his family, even if it meant swallowing every last ounce of my pride. But the responsible choice slowly became a life sentence. It became my identity. The label of failure was branded onto me, and no amount of hard work could wash it off. The most painful memory, the one that I try to keep locked away, surfaced with brutal clarity. It was about a year ago. I'd come home early one morning, my shift ending just as the sun was rising. The house was quiet, and I thought Sarah was still asleep. I was about to go to the kitchen to make coffee when I heard her voice, a hushed whisper from the bedroom. She was on the phone with her mother. I stopped, my hand hovering over the doorway. "I know, Mom," she was saying, her voice strained. "I know he's trying, but it's embarrassing." The word hit me like a physical blow, embarrassing. We go out with our friends and they talk about their husbands' promotions, their new projects, and I have to say, mine is a janitor. I just wish he'd try for something more. For me, for us. I didn't hear what her mother said in response. I didn't need to. I backed away from the door, silent as the ghost I was, and slipped out of the house. I walked for hours, the word echoing in my head. Embarrassing, embarrassing, embarrassing. It wasn't about the money, it was about the shame she felt being attached to me. And I realized then that I hadn't just failed in business. I had failed her. A flicker of movement on the television screen in the corner of the room pulled me back to the present. It was a morning news show. They were running a segment on valerium, and there she was. A young woman, maybe in her early 30s, clutching a small, frail-looking girl in her arms. The girl was smiling, her cheeks rosy. The mother was weeping, tears of pure, unadulterated joy streaming down her face. "It's a miracle," she sobbed into the microphone. "My daughter, Lily, she has her life back. Dr. Finch, Alistair Finch, he's a savior. He gave my little girl a future." The camera zoomed in on the child's trusting, innocent face, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. The despair, the fear, the crushing weight of my own inadequacy. It all burned away, replaced by something cold, hard, and clear as glass. This wasn't about my failed business anymore. It wasn't about my wife's disappointment or her father's condescension. It was about Lily. It was about every other child, every other person who was about to take that miracle drug. It was about the names in red on that spreadsheet. My invisibility, my status as a failure, the very thing that had been my curse for years, suddenly became my greatest weapon. They would never see me coming. They would be looking for a rival scientist, a corporate spy, a disgruntled executive. They would never, in a million years, look down at the man pushing the broom. A strange, bitter phrase formed in my mind, a mantra for what was to come. It wasn't about revenge until it was. I saved a copy of the entire drive, encrypted it, and started to make a plan. A plan born in the shadows requires a clear head. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I couldn't be a charging bull. A janitor with a hard drive full of damning secrets versus a multi-billion-dollar corporation was not a fair fight. It was a mouse against a steamroller. If I made one wrong move, I wouldn't just be discredited, I would be erased. They would bury me in litigation, slap me with a non-disclosure agreement I didn't even know I was bound by, and probably sue me for stealing company property. The truth wouldn't matter. The only thing that would matter was the narrative, and they had the money to write any story they wanted. So, I had to be smarter. I had to be a ghost. My first step was to secure the data. My old IT instincts kicked in, the muscle memory of a life I'd left behind. I spent the next few hours meticulously creating backups. I used a sophisticated encryption software, something open source and virtually uncrackable. I created 3 separate copies. The first, I uploaded to a secure anonymous cloud server based in a country with no extradition treaty with the United States, a digital dead man's switch. The second, I transferred to a tiny micro SD card, which I then carefully sealed in a small plastic bag and taped to the underside of a loose floorboard in my closet. The third copy, I put on a nondescript USB stick. This afternoon, I would go to the post office and mail it to a P.O. box I intended to rent under a false name. Paranoia is a survival skill when you're hunting monsters. Next, I needed a voice, a way to get the information out without revealing myself. I took a bus to the public library downtown, a place I hadn't been in years. The smell of old paper and dust felt comforting, a world away from the sterile scent of BioGenix. I sat at a public terminal, the sticky keyboard feeling alien under my fingers, and used the Tor browser to create a new anonymous email account, icarus.whistleblower@protonmail.com. It felt powerful, typing that out. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't just Max the janitor, I was someone else. I was a variable they hadn't accounted for. From there, I began my research. I didn't look for the biggest names in journalism. The network stars at major news outlets were too close to the corporate world, too likely to have a cozy relationship with BioGenix's PR department. A phone call from Alistair Finch could kill the story before it ever breathed. I needed someone hungry, someone with a history of skepticism towards big pharma, someone independent. It took me 2 hours of digging through articles and opinion pieces, but I found her. Jessica Riley. She ran a small subscription-based investigative news site called The Independent Chronicle. Her work was sharp, well-researched, and she had a clear disdain for corporate spin. She was a terrier. If I gave her a bone, she wouldn't let go. Even with a plan, the isolation was crushing. I needed to talk to someone. Not Sarah, but someone who could see the whole board. There was only one person. Dave. Dave owned a small, cluttered computer repair shop in a strip mall on the other side of town. We'd been friends since high school, and he was the one person who never treated me differently after my business went under. He just saw me as Max. I went to his shop that afternoon, the little bell over the door announcing my arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt completely at odds with the weight in my chest. He was behind the counter, soldering a motherboard, a magnifying visor perched on his forehead. "Max, what's up, man? Don't see you in the daylight much," he said, smiling as he looked up. I pulled the original hard drive from my jacket pocket and placed it on the counter between a pile of dead RAM sticks and a tangled mess of cables. "I need your help," I said, my voice low. "I need you to look at this, and I need you to tell me I'm not crazy." For the next hour, in the back room of his shop, I told him everything. I watched his face shift from curiosity to disbelief, then to wide-eyed horror as he clicked through the Icarus_I internal folder. He scrolled through the spreadsheets, his technical mind immediately grasping the implications of the raw data. He let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Max," he breathed, leaning back in his chair. This is the real deal. This is unaltered telemetry. The timestamps, the metadata. It's all here. This is a smoking gun." Then the fear set in. He looked at me, his expression grave. "Are you insane? You can't be the one to do this. These people are not your average bullies. They're a corporation with a market cap bigger than the GDP of some countries. They will crush you. They'll ruin your life, say you faked it, and sue you into oblivion. You have a wife, a life. You can't." "What life, Dave?" I asked, the bitterness I usually kept swallowed down rising in my throat. "A life where my own wife is ashamed of me, where I'm a walking punchline at family dinners. They already think I'm nothing. What more can they take from me?" He saw the look in my eyes, the dead-end resolve. he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Okay, he said finally. Okay, man. I'm scared to death for you, but I'm with you. What do you need? His validation was like a sip of water in the desert. He was the voice of reason, but he was also the first person to believe in me. He agreed to act as my technical expert, to hold on to a copy of the data and be ready to independently verify its authenticity if and when the time came. He was my first and only ally. That night, back at work, my perspective had changed. I was no longer just cleaning. I was gathering intelligence. My invisibility cloak was now my most valuable asset. I pushed my cart through the executive wing, my ears open. The atmosphere was different, tense. The usual low hum of activity was replaced by a nervous energy. I saw things I'd never paid attention to before. I saw Alistair Finch's executive assistant shredding a mountain of documents. I saw the head of legal storming out of a meeting, his face pale and grim. My mission for the night was to find something more, a piece of corroborating evidence that was more human than a spreadsheet. I knew where to look. Dr. Eris Thorne, one of the lead scientists on the Valerium project. I'd seen him many nights, long after everyone else had gone home. He'd just sit in his darkened office, a bottle of expensive scotch on his desk staring at the wall. He had the haunted look of a man carrying a terrible burden. He was my subplot, the human cost of this conspiracy on the inside. Tonight, his office was empty, but he'd left in a hurry. The bottle of scotch was still on his desk, half empty, and his wastebasket wasn't. Usually, it was just a few paper towels and a coffee cup. Tonight, it was full of crumpled balls of paper. My heart hammered in my chest. I took the bin to my cart, and in the quiet of the service elevator, I carefully uncrumpled each piece. Most of it was just gibberish, frustrated scribbles. But then I found it. It was a letter, written on company letterhead. It was stained with what looked like water, or maybe tears. It was a letter of resignation, addressed to Alistair Finch. In it, Dr. Thorne laid out his entire crisis of conscience. He wrote, "I can no longer in good faith remain a part of this project. The directive to suppress the Phase 3 cardiac event data is not just an ethical breach, it is a potential death sentence for future patients. We have a moral and scientific obligation to report these findings, not bury them for the sake of market optics. I cannot have my name associated with this fraud. I hereby tender my resignation, effective immediately." The letter was dated 2 months ago. It was never sent. He had lost his nerve. He had chosen the paycheck and the prestige over his own soul. But he had written it. It was the proof I needed. It was the human voice that would speak for the numbers. I took out my phone, my hands trembling slightly, and took several clear, high-resolution photographs of the letter. This was my hidden leverage. This, combined with the data, was undeniable. As I was leaving the executive wing, I passed by the main server room. The door was propped open. A tech was inside, running diagnostics. I saw a monitor displaying a system log, and a line caught my eye. Order, Finch. Order, Finch. Order, _code, 77. B1, date, 6 months ago. The day before they submitted their final package to the FDA. It was the paper trail. The direct order from the king himself to hide the bodies. The silent takeover was about to begin. The first move had to be precise, a surgeon's cut, not a butcher's blow. The goal wasn't to blow the whole thing up at once. It was to light a small, contained fire in the heart of their fortress and watch them panic. From the anonymity of the library computer, I composed the email to Jessica Riley. I attached only one thing, a single, devastatingly simple chart from the Icarus_I internal folder. It showed 2 lines. The top line in green was the publicly reported patient outcome data for Valerium. The bottom line in stark red was the true data, including the buried fatalities. The divergence between the 2 lines was a chasm of lies. The subject line of the email was simple: BioGenix Project, Icarus, the real numbers. In the body of the email, I wrote only one sentence: Ask Alistair Finch about patient X301 at his press conference tomorrow. Patient X301 was a 45-year-old man, a father of two, according to the file. He had died of a massive heart attack on day 27 of the trial. His death had been officially recorded as unrelated to treatment. I hit send. The small message sent notification felt like pulling the pin on a grenade. I didn't have to wait long. A good journalist doesn't run with an anonymous tip without trying to verify it. I knew Jessica Riley would make a call, and that call would be the tripwire. I spent the rest of the day in a state of suspended animation, just waiting. The text from Dave came around 4 p. It was just one word. Incoming. That night, my shift at BioGenix felt like walking into a different dimension. The usual quiet, sterile calm was gone, replaced by a frantic, barely concealed panic. It was everywhere. I saw it in the way people walked faster, in the hushed, angry conversations that stopped the moment I rounded a corner with my cart. The executive wing was the epicenter of the earthquake. The lights were all on, and the glass-walled conference rooms were full of people in expensive suits who looked like they were facing a firing squad. I was emptying the trash near the main boardroom when I heard Finch's voice, a furious roar that was nothing like the calm, charismatic tone he used for the public. Find him. I don't care what it takes. Security, legal, IT. I want everyone on this. Is it a competitor? Is it someone we fired? I want a name by morning. They were hunting a ghost, and they were looking in all the wrong graveyards. They were investigating disgruntled executives, scanning for breaches from rival corporations. The thought that the source of their terror was the man silently replacing the trash bag in the corner of the room was so far outside their realm of possibility that it didn't exist. My invisibility was absolute. I watched them scramble, their arrogance curdling into fear, and I felt a cold, quiet satisfaction. They were so busy looking up at the sky for their enemies that they never thought to look down at the ground they walked on. Later, I was polishing the floor outside the legal department's office. The door was ajar. I could hear their lead counsel, a severe-looking woman named Margaret, speaking in a low, urgent voice. We kill it, Alistair. We get ahead of it. We issue a statement right now. We frame this as a malicious act of corporate sabotage from a competitor trying to manipulate our stock price before the quarterly earnings call. We call the reporter's source a liar and a fraud. We go on the offensive. Alistair's reply was clipped, strained. Do it, and find the leak. I just kept pushing my buffer, the machine's steady hum, a counterpoint to the chaos unfolding around me. They were building a wall to defend against a lie, completely unaware that the truth was already inside, holding the keys to the entire building. The panic was beautiful in its own way. It was the frantic, desperate thrashing of a predator that has just realized it's caught in a trap it doesn't understand. And I, the ghost, just watched. The silent takeover was complete. Now all I had to do was wait for the dawn. I got home just as the first hint of gray was lightening the eastern sky. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the tense, coiled silence before a storm. I knew she was awake. I could feel it. I walked into the living room and saw her sitting on the couch, wrapped in her robe, a mug of tea held in her hands. She didn't look at me. My father called, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. He was at the club tonight. He heard things. Rumors. She finally turned to look at me, and her eyes weren't filled with the usual pity or disappointment. They were filled with a cold, simmering anger. He said there's some kind of trouble brewing at BioGenix. Some story about a data leak. He told me to tell you to keep your head down and be grateful you have a job there. He said a thing like this is when they start cleaning house. And people like you are always the first to go. People like you. The phrase hung in the air between us, thick and poisonous. People without ambition, people who were disposable, people who were embarrassing. In that moment, all the years of quiet resentment, all the swallowed insults, all the nights I'd come home smelling of disinfectant to a wife who saw me as a burden, it all just evaporated. It didn't hurt anymore. I looked at her, at this woman I had once loved so much that I had willingly shrunk myself down to fit into the tiny box she and her family had built for me, and I felt nothing but a profound, aching sadness. We were strangers, and we had been for a long, long time. "Max, are you listening to me?" she demanded, her voice rising. "This is serious. You can't afford to lose this job." I didn't answer her. I walked past her into our bedroom. I pulled a duffel bag from the top of the closet, the one we used for weekend trips we never took anymore. I started pulling clothes from my drawers, a few pairs of jeans, some t-shirts, socks, underwear. I moved with a calm, deliberate purpose that felt entirely new. "What are you doing?" Her voice was behind me, sharp with confusion and a dawning sense of alarm. "Max, what is going on?" I zipped the bag shut and turned to face her. For the first time, I didn't try to reassure her or placate her. I didn't apologize for my existence. I just looked her in the eyes. "I'm going to work," I said. The confusion on her face was total. "Work? Your shift is over. You just got home." "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just getting started." I walked past her, out of the bedroom and towards the front door. She followed me, her bare feet padding on the hardwood floor. "Max, stop this. Talk to me. What did you do?" I paused with my hand on the doorknob and looked back at her. I saw the panic in her eyes, but it was a selfish panic. It wasn't for me, it was for her, for the stable, predictable, if disappointing, life that was suddenly threatening to come apart. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this was the end of us. This was the family exodus. It wasn't a dramatic shouting affair. It was a quiet, final departure from a life that had been slowly suffocating me. I was leaving the house, yes, but I was also leaving behind the ghost of Max, the failure. He was her husband, not mine. Not anymore. "Watch the news today, Sarah," I said softly. "It's all going to be on the news." And then I walked out the door, closing it gently behind me. I didn't look back. The sun was coming up, and I had a press conference to attend. The company's desperate counter-manipulation was already in motion. I'd seen the press release they were preparing, the one that painted the leak as an act of corporate espionage. They were building their narrative of lies, brick by brick. But I was bringing a wrecking ball. The ballroom at the Four Seasons was a spectacle of corporate self-congratulation. It was packed to the gills with reporters, investors, and industry analysts, all buzzing with anticipation. Massive banners with the BioGenix logo and the word Valerium hung from the ceiling. A long table was set up on the stage, with a single imposing podium at its center. I slipped in through a service entrance, my janitor's uniform a perfect camouflage. Nobody gave me a second glance. I was just part of the scenery. I found what I was looking for, a small AV control closet at the back of the room, its door slightly ajar. Inside, a tangle of wires connected to a master control board for the projectors and sound system. It was old tech, easily bypassed if you knew what you were doing. And I knew. I set up my laptop, patching it into the main projector feed. The irony was so thick I could taste it. The skills from my failed IT business were about to be put to use on the biggest stage imaginable. I was ready. Alistair Finch strode onto the stage to a round of thunderous applause. He was the picture of confidence, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his smile radiating power and benevolence. He stepped up to the podium and launched into his speech, his voice smooth and commanding. He spoke of innovation, of hope, of a new dawn for medicine. He talked about shareholder value and projected earnings. He was a master showman, and the crowd was eating it up. I watched him on my small laptop screen, my heart pounding a steady rhythmic drum against my ribs. Finally, he finished. "And now," he said, beaming, "I'd be happy to take a few of your questions." A dozen hands shot up. He pointed to a reporter from a major financial network. The question was a softball about market strategy. Finch answered it with practiced ease. Then another, about international distribution. And then, I saw her stand up. Jessica Riley. She held her microphone with a steady hand, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice cutting through the room's low hum. Jessica Riley, Independent Chronicle. Congratulations on the approval. However, I'd like to ask you about an irregularity in the trial data. Specifically, can you comment on the case of patient X301 and the suppressed data regarding fatal cardiac arrhythmia in a statistically significant portion of the Phase 3 cohort? A hush fell over the room. It was as if all the air had been sucked out. Finch's smile didn't falter, but I saw a flicker in his eyes, a micro-expression of pure cold panic. He held up a hand, chuckling dismissively. "Thank you for the question, Jessica," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But we're not going to be baited by baseless rumors, likely planted by a competitor to manipulate our stock on a big news day. Our data is pristine. It has been rigorously vetted by the FDA. The safety and efficacy of valerium are beyond question. Next question, please." He tried to point to someone else, but Jessica didn't sit down. "With all due respect, sir," she pressed, "my source is not a competitor, and my source provided documentation. Documentation that is no doubt fabricated." Finch snapped, his composure finally starting to crack. "This is a pathetic attempt at corporate sabotage, and we will not dignify it with any further comment." That was my cue. My fingers flew across my keyboard. On the massive screen behind Alistair Finch, the soaring BioGenix stock chart vanished. It was replaced by the simple two-line graph I had sent to Jessica: green for the lie, red for the truth. A collective gasp went through the audience. Finch, seeing the reaction, slowly turned around. His face went white. He stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape, for what felt like an eternity. "What is this?" he stammered, turning back to the crowd. "Some kind of prank? A fee, cut the feed. Cut the feed now." But I wasn't finished. I switched the feed again. Now the screen showed a crystal-clear image of Dr. Eris Thorne's tear-stained, unsent resignation letter. The words "I cannot have my name associated with this fraud" were magnified, impossible to ignore. A frantic murmur swept through the room as reporters started reading the text aloud. Finch was completely unraveling. "Security, shut this down," he bellowed, his voice a panicked screech. "One last slide." I brought up the image of the server log. The purge order. Finch. His name, right there, next to the command that had buried the truth. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Cameras were flashing. People were scrambling. Finch stood there, frozen, a cornered animal caught in the glare of 100 headlights. His empire was collapsing around him in real time, on live television. And then, I made my final move. I pushed open the door of the ASV closet and stepped out. I started walking. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I just walked, my work boots silent on the plush carpet, right through the heart of the chaos. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, reporters turning their cameras from Finch to me, this inexplicable apparition in a gray janitor's uniform. I walked all the way to the front of the room, my eyes locked on Alistair Finch. He saw me. His eyes widened in stunned disbelief. He was looking at the janitor, the ghost, the failure, the man he never saw, the man who was nothing. He was looking at his worst nightmare. I stopped just at the foot of the stage and looked up at him. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. My presence was the only statement that mattered. The janitor had taken out the trash. The aftermath was a tidal wave. BioGenix stock didn't just fall, it ceased to exist, suspended from trading before it hit zero. The FDA, in an emergency press conference of its own, announced the immediate suspension of valerium's approval pending a full investigation. By the end of the day, the words Department of Justice and criminal probe were being used in the same sentence as Alistair Finch. The house of cards had been blown over by a single invisible breath. Dr. Thorne, seeing his own words broadcast to the world, found the courage he'd lacked for months. He walked into the FBI's field office that afternoon with his own copy of the data and became their star witness. The dam had broken. My life, on the other hand, became strangely quiet. My phone buzzed incessantly for days. Calls and texts from Sarah, from her parents, from reporters, from lawyers. I ignored them all. I saw Sarah on the news once, chased down the street by a pack of reporters asking if she knew what her husband was planning. She just looked lost and terrified, a victim of a story she had never bothered to read. I felt a pang of something, not love, not hate, but a distant, detached pity. Her world, built on appearances and other people's approval, had crumbled. Jessica Riley's story won every journalism award imaginable the following year. She called me once to thank me. She offered me a portion of her book deal. I turned it down. I never wanted money or fame. I just wanted the truth to have a voice. Eventually, the federal government reached out, under the Whistleblower Protection Act. I was entitled to a significant percentage of the fines levied against BioGenix. The number they told me was so large it seemed like a typo. I didn't buy a mansion or a sports car. I took a portion of the money and rented a small clean workshop space on the industrial side of town. I bought new equipment, the kind I used to only dream about. I hung a simple sign in the window, Max's IT Solutions. I started small, helping local businesses with their networks, recovering their lost data, and building systems they could rely on. It was quiet work. It was honest work. It was my work. Sometimes, late at night in my shop, I'll stop what I'm doing and look at my hands. They no longer smell of bleach and ammonia. They smell faintly of solder and ozone. They're the same hands, but they feel different. They feel like my own. They saw a janitor, a failure, a ghost who was supposed to be invisible, to blend in with the walls and be forgotten. They never stopped to think that the person who cleans up your messes sees every secret you leave behind. They thought my invisibility was a weakness, a sign of my insignificance, but in the end, it was my greatest strength. It allowed me to get closer than any of them could have ever imagined. So let me ask you, have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever been written off by the people who are supposed to love you, only to find a strength inside yourself that they refuse to see? It's a lonely place to be, but it's also a place where you can find out who you really are. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the underdog, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe for more. I'm really interested to hear what you think in the comments below. Do you think I went too far by hijacking the press conference, or do you think Alistair Finch and his whole rotten company got exactly what they deserved? Let me know your thoughts. I read every single one.